is a random Saturday or a random Sunday, Mother's Day in the Americas, pop-up live here for NBT Nation. Wanted to jump on real quick, obviously coming to you from the mobile studios, doing a little bit of traveling, and wanted to talk about a subject near and dear to my heart, as I've often shared with you, NBT Nation. I'm in the trenches right alongside of you. In my day job, I'm a learning and development manager and got a subject that I wanted to jump in because I've experienced this fairly recently. How do you wing it without actually winging it? How do you wing it? In other words, you're working on a project, and we all know as trainers, you want to prepare, you want to go through a formal process, you really want to have a specific objective in mind, you want to prepare your material, you want to prepare all your learning content, you want to have exercises, you want to have engagement and activities, and have all of your presenters prepped and ready to go. That's the perfect state. In real life, though, oftentimes we have to kind of rush. We have to truncate that time down. And sometimes that time gets truncated so much or reduced so much that especially when there's subject matter experts and other people from other departments, other teams who maybe don't train all that regularly, who don't have a background of training, they may not have time in their schedules to complete the prep work, they may not have leadership support on their end to engage in the planning process, whatever. There's a whole bunch of reasons where all of a sudden you've got a very narrow window of time to get this group ready. And next thing you know, these subject matter experts are going to be in front of a group of trainees, and you haven't really done a proper planning. That's what we're talking about today. How do you get those folks ready? How do you wing it without actually winging it? If you find this topic interesting, give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. And again, this is picked from the pages of real life. I have experienced this myself. So how do you wing it without actually winging it? So you don't have much time to prep people. You don't have much time to get your subject matter experts ready. Here's what you do. Number one, as a trainer, you have to pick and choose very carefully when you are actually able to wing it. Sometimes you can't wing it because the subject matter doesn't allow for it. If you're training very precise processes, you've got regulatory requirements. This is incredibly intricate information that you've got to have a really organized training session on. You just can't make it up in the moment. You just can't. You're going to be jumping around all over the place, and it's absolutely positively not going to work. I'm referring down to my notes here. Real technical stuff with real detailed knowledge, there are some situations where the material itself prevents, and you as a trainer have to fight to get those subject matter experts prepared in a formal process. You have to have it all the material, all the exercises, everything has to be in place for some of those subjects. Now, some other subjects, you can wing it. You can put something together very, very rapidly and almost do it live. When you're teaching maybe soft skills, maybe when you're teaching sort of foundational knowledge, conceptual knowledge, when you're just sort of introducing ideas, when you're just trying to paint a picture, if you're doing an introduction to type session, you're new at the company and we want to introduce you to company ethos or something like that. Most people in the company can talk about those topics off the top of their head. It's not a planned, prepped session like we would prefer, but you can do that kind of discussion. You can do that kind of training live and kind of wing it. You can get away with it there. So again, I'm not espousing that we wing it. Of course you want to plan. Of course you want to, hey, Emmanuel, welcome. Great to see you here on this Sunday chat. Great to see you in the comments. We're talking about how do you wing it? How do you wing a training session? How do you do it live with minimal preparation? How do you kind of throw something together at the last minute? It's not what we recommend. It's not what we want as trainers. It's not what is best practice. It's not effective. but there are some times where you have to do something very, very quickly. Here's the tips of how you can make that work when you're forced to do so. So number one, know when you can wing it. Number two, you as the trainer have to set the agenda. You as the trainer have to figure out a way to get with those subject matter experts. And if you can't hardly get any time with them, if you're not getting much time, use that time to craft the agenda for the session, and you as the trainer put that together. We're going to do the welcome. We're going to do the overview of what we're learning today. We're going to do the housekeeping and ground rules of the session. We're going to do a warm-up exercise. We're going to do topics 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to do it in this order, and you guide getting that put together. If you can get the agenda in place, you can at least, as the trainer, control the flow of the session. Even if you have very minimal pre-session planning, you can at least control the agenda piece. And you can use your trainer knowledge to understand what's the right order, what's the right pacing, what's the right amount of time, how long should you spend on each session. So again, if you're winging it, if you're trying to kind of rush and put together a session with subject matter experts who don't want to or can't invest the time to plan ahead of time, if you're forced to kind of throw a session together working with other people, make sure you as the trainer are the one who is putting the agenda together, because then you can enforce good training practice, you can do a good learning progression, you know when you can take breaks, you know the order that's going to make sense, et cetera, et cetera. So it looks like Jonathan C., great to see you out there. Glad to have you with us, both Jonathan and Emmanuel. Great Sunday afternoon live. We're talking about how can you put together a training session very, very quickly, and where you're kind of winging it without actually winging it. And sadly, in the corporate training world, sometimes as trainers, we are forced to put together sessions very quickly because the subject matter experts we're working with can't or won't spend the time planning. So know when you can wing it, set the agenda, and then thirdly, know your audience. You have to know your audience. If the audience can't tolerate, if the audience isn't ready, if it's not fair to the audience to kind of wing it, you're not going to be able to get away with winging it. And here's what I mean. If the audience absolutely positively is going to be resistant, they need to know the details, they want to know the details, and you're trying to just keep them at this sort of surface level of knowledge, remember we talked about you can only wing it in certain cases, and if the audience doesn't want to go along on this ride, you're going to run into problems. You can't wing it. Number two, you've got to know your audience in terms of what they feel comfortable with. So if they feel very anxious and nervous and they want to know how all the pieces fit together, and if they are going to get super duper resistant because you don't have all the answers as the training crew, they ask questions and you're like, I don't know, because you didn't prep. You can't then wing it. You can't try to kind of rush something because the audience can't handle it. It's going to build resistance. They're going to get very, very nervous. They're going to stop trusting you. So if you know they're going to ask a ton of questions, they have to know the details to do their job, you know they're going to push back, you probably can't rush this training. And again, as a trainer, you will have to kind of put your foot down and say, we're not moving forward with this session until everybody goes through a proper training process. So know when you can wing it, set the agenda, and know the audience. As a trainer, if you can do those things, now you're at least starting to head in a direction where maybe you can put together a session it's not going to be as great as if it were planned properly, but you can make it so it's at least effective on some level. How can you wing it without actually winging it? That's the subject of today. If you're finding this interesting, give me a thumbs up. Jonathan, Emmanuel, let me know questions drop me some questions. But it's great to have you here as part of NBT Nation. Point number 4, you've got to make sure as the trainer that everybody else in the session knows their role for that session. So a day or two before the session, you're starting to assign people to to very specific roles. The day before the session, you're going through and explaining what those roles are. You are going to do this, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. The morning of, you're reinforcing that with a pre-huddle before the session. Here's what everybody's roles are. You're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. You got it? What questions do you have? And those roles typically are going to be, you need to establish that your job as the trainer is the facilitator, the host, the MC. You're going to kind of pull things back if people are getting too deep into the weeds. You're going to kind of push things along if you're starting to drag. You're going to push for clarity if the audience is confused. Your job is to be the conductor. Subject matter experts, 1, 2, and 3, let's say there's 3 SMEs going to be presenting. Your job is to present. Maybe you've got some other people that are there. Maybe it's a sponsor or senior leader. Hey, senior leader, your job is to help me kick things off. Your job is to lend moral support, and your job is to make sure your people are here and paying attention. Assign those roles and make it crystal clear, reinforce it, and you take control and ownership of that session. That's the only way to make it work, and everybody's got to kind of know the piece of the puzzle. So you want to make it, if you want to kind of wing it and really put a training session together with minimal planning, you have to define everybody's role ahead of time, reinforce it, and enforce it during the session. Number 5, you have to have a super strong opening to the session, and you have to have crystal clear expectations and ground rules. If you're going to try to do this session with very, very minimal planning, if you're going to try to do this session without going through a proper planning process and you're just rapidly getting this rolled out, it's up to you as the trainer. As part of that agenda that I talked about in point number 2, you need to kick the session off with tons of energy, real, authentic, not cheesy energy. You have to set crystal clear expectations for the audience and help them to understand the rules of the road. And then you have to really get into those ground rules. Hey, listen, here's what we're here to learn today. Here's the objective of the session. And this is what we're going to focus in on. Because you didn't really do a proper planning process, you don't want to deviate away from that session objective too much because you got nothing planned. You don't really have anything planned for the actual objective itself. So you certainly don't want to be going all over the place. So you as the trainer, when you put that agenda together, you need to be heavily present in the first couple bullet points of that agenda. You're doing the opening. You're doing the welcome. You're doing the ground rules. You're doing the expectation. You and maybe somebody else are doing the warm-up. So the first 15, 20, 30 minutes is you as the trainer. And you're getting everybody in learning mode. You're getting everybody participating. You're getting everybody engaged and bring them in. So that when you go to the subject matter experts who didn't really prepare that well, you've got a fighting chance to keep the attention of the audience. So that's a really important point. It's point number 5, strong opening, set expectations, really crystal clear ground rules to kick the session off. What do you think, NBT Nation? See that we've got a number of people out there still. Put the old spectacles on here. Hopefully you're enjoying this. If you do, give me an old thumbs up. All right. As a facilitator, point number 6, and this is a bit of a building on point number 5. Point number 5, you have to have a strong opening. Point number 6 is you as the facilitator, you need to own that room. You need to be friendly and polite and warm and welcoming and use humor, but there is no deviation from the game plan. There is no deviation from these roles. If you're going to do something organically in the moment, in other words, you see an opportunity to capitalize on, and you're going to kind of pivot in the moment, you need to control that as the facilitator. You decide when you do that pivot. You decide when you slow things down because the audience clearly isn't getting it. You decide when you need to go back and reinforce a point. And you need to make sure the other presenters there understand that it's your show and you're in charge. And I don't mean that in a jerky, I don't mean that like you're a jerk, but the only fighting chance you have to make this an effective session when you haven't really been able to prep very much is that you guide things so that you don't start going off the rails, you don't lose control of the room, and you don't start just sort of going out of control. Because if you do that, I guarantee what will happen is your subject matter experts will just start presenting and spewing information. They're going to confuse everybody. They're probably going to share way too much information and overwhelm people. You're going to get off track because your audience is going to ask questions. It's going to be a mess. I like to call it use a velvet hammer. The velvet is the friendliness, the warmth, the openness, the encouragement, the smile, the energy, the humor. The hammer part is this is my show, not yours. That's a way to make it work. That's a way to wing it without actually winging it in the moment. And you can lean into all of your experience to read the room, to read the energy in the room, and guide the session in the direction you want it to go because you're maintaining control despite the fact you don't have a lot of pre-planning to work with. So that's point number 6. Point number 7 to make it work, how to wing it without actually winging it when you didn't have time to prep properly. You got to use the questions parking lot. If somebody in the audience starts asking questions and they really want to go down the rabbit hole and go into some direction that's not going to be effective for the session, you got to park that. I mean, you should do that in general for any session, no matter how much you plan. Using a parking lot is a good best practice anyway, but in this case, you definitely have to use it because if you start jumping all over the place with a bunch of questions randomly all over the place, the session's going to get messy really, really quickly. So use the parking lot. Hey, I thank you for that question. I really appreciate that question. Let's go throw that in the parking lot and then we'll come back with answers later. And then actually go back with the answers later. So use that to keep things on track. Number 8, I've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but here's a way to wing it without actually winging it. You as the instructor need to flow like water. While you're not only controlling the room, you're trying to keep the pace and the energy and really kind of thinking through things in the moment, using your trainer knowledge to keep these subject matter experts on track and to keep the learners learning. You got to kind of flow like water. You got to pivot. Yeah, you got this agenda and yeah, you got a plan, but you got to read the room. I'll give you a quick example. You're chugging right along. You're trying to get through material and you suddenly recognize the audience is drifting off. Stop the subject matter expert. Have the people in the room just stand up, stretch, talk a little bit amongst themselves, give them a 30-second, 45-second, 1-minute break. Just sort of, oh, okay, let's move around, and then have them sit down and go back to the subject matter expert. But you got to flow like water while this is all unfolding real time. Read the room, make that judgment call based on your trainer experience to help that subject matter expert out and give your participants a chance to learn. So flow like water. Maybe there's a chance as somebody's sharing something, you might be inspired to say, whoa, whoa, wait a minute. Let's do a little quick round of teach back in the moment. And so the subject matter expert is talking about blah, blah, blah. And you say, let me jump in here real quick. Could you, and pull somebody out of the audience, just explain that concept back to us? That subject matter expert doesn't know teach backs, but we as trainers do. And so if we're flowing like water and we're engaged and we're helping and we're standing up there alongside them, then we can capitalize on those opportunities. So you want to control the room, like I said, and maintain your facilitator role, maintain control in point number 6, but point number 8, flow like water. Look for those opportunities to capitalize. All right. We're cooking along here. How are we doing? About 20 minutes in. I got some time left. I want to thank you all for joining me here on this Sunday, Mother's Day in the USA, or Pop Up Alive from the No Boring Training mobile studios out on the road. How do you wing it? Now, as trainers, we know you can't really wing it. And when even using these tips to make it work, we know we're leaving a lot of learning opportunities behind. We know we're missing a lot of learning opportunities, and we know it's not as effective as if we had planned on the front end. But sometimes in corporate America, we as trainers are forced to launch training sessions much quicker than we would like, with much less prep than we'd like, especially when we're working with subject matter experts who can't or won't prep. So these tips are how do we make that work in the moment. So, goodness, how are we doing here? We are down to number 9. Reinforce, reinforce, reinforce. Here's what I mean by that. As the presenters are presenting and there are key points, you need to go back and make sure you reinforce as best you can what those key points are. You're over at the dry erase board documenting the key points, you're throwing them on a flip chart, you're dropping them into a chat if it's a virtual session, but you really got to reinforce. So then maybe during the session you see an opportunity to do the teach back that I mentioned. Maybe when the subject matter expert kind of wraps up and when they say, any questions? Because I pretty guarantee you they'll do that if you haven't prepped them ahead of time. So when the SME goes, any questions? You can recognize that as an opportunity to say, hey, why don't we do a quick activity that you make up on the spot? You know, split into teams, and then you talk about what you got out of the session, you talk about what you got out of the session, and then we're going to have you share some of your takeaways. You can do that in the moment. Have the audience split up into those two teams. They talk amongst themselves and debrief the session to themselves, and then you have them share what they got out of the session back to the SME. That's a great way to reinforce. Another great way, hey, before we move on, I want you to take 30 seconds and I want you to bullet point on a Post-it note, what are some of the key takeaways you got out of this presentation? And have the participants write it down right there. You gotta reinforce, reinforce, reinforce. And then you as the presenter are also summarizing what that subject matter expert said, and real time in the moment, you're tying the different topics that are being talked about back to a central theme, back to that objective. You have to do that organically in the moment and remind the participants how this information fits together and ties back into the objective. So you got to do all that real time, but reinforce, reinforce, reinforce the points that you are able to get across, even though you weren't really able to prep out a huge, beautiful training session. All right, so we're down to number 10. Number 10 here. I'll try to quit hitting my table here. We're talking about how do you wing it without actually winging it, and at least get a little bit of learning discipline, learning best practices, force-fed into a session, even if your subject matter experts kind of refuse to prepare or they just genuinely didn't have the time to prepare. And those scenarios happen a ton in corporate training. When that does happen, what do we do as trainers to make it work? Here's 10 tips to make it work. Let's review real quick. Number 1, you got to know when you can wing it. There are some scenarios where you absolutely positively cannot get away with it, and you as a trainer have to put your foot down. Know when. Number 2, know your audience. Can they tolerate a hastily thrown together session, or is there a reason why that's just not going to be effective to them? And again, put your foot down. Number 3, you set the agenda. You as the trainer build an effective agenda that has the right material, the right pace, that is going to be material that can be done sort of off the cuff and actually work. You put that together, and if you can only get a few minutes of time with the SME, use it to help put that agenda together. Number 4, make sure all of the people in that session that are delivering the material, whether it's you as the facilitator, whether it's the SME, whether it's the IT person who's there to help out, whether it's a senior leader, whether it's just an observer. They know their roles. You've got to make them understand and then enforce that they follow their roles. Make sure everybody plays their part, and you assign the roles to make sure that the right people are doing the right things. Once you do that, make sure number 5, you have a super strong opening to the session. The first 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, high energy, clear expectation, clear ground rules. You're at the front of the room as much as you can possibly be up there before you turn over to the first sort of SME, so that you're really getting the room going. You're really setting the expectations. All right, so strong opening. Number 6, facilitator. You are the facilitator, and you must keep things on track to the best of your ability. Be friendly, be nice, be polite, big smile, be warm, engaging, all the normal stuff. But you are running that show, and you got to keep the train on the tracks during the session. Don't let things start to spiral out of control. Number 7, use questions parking lot. Don't let those down in the weeds, off topic, crazy questions pull you away from what you're trying to accomplish, because you already got enough challenge as it is with the lack of prep. So don't make it any harder by having all these wacky questions. Use a parking lot and then go back and get those questions answered at a more appropriate time. Number 8, you got to flow like water, and you got to pivot in the moment, and you got to recognize those opportunities live. Pull out all of your training, facilitating your training and facilitating experience. Flow like water. Really kind of pivot in the moment to make the session work and keep everybody moving towards getting to the session objective. All right, so there you go. Oh, and then lastly, number 9, reinforce, reinforce, reinforce. Key point. You as the trainer. The SME is going to probably just present a whole big bunch of information because they didn't get a chance to prepare, and they didn't follow your process to prepare training instead of a presentation. So they're going to get up there and they're just going to vomit up a bunch of information. So what you do as the trainer is you reinforce, reinforce, reinforce. You take what they've shared and put it down into smaller bites, and then you reinforce it repeatedly throughout the day and call all of the information back to the session objective. And then lastly, number 10, the 10th tip to make a session that you didn't get to properly plan. How do you make it as effective as it can be? Create content in the moment. Create content in the moment. Again, if those subject matter experts didn't get a chance to follow your preparation process, I guarantee you they probably aren't going to have a lot of material to work with. Maybe they throw something up on a screen, maybe they have a couple PowerPoint slides, maybe they just have an internal document or something. But my guess is they're not going to have a lot of content to work with. So what do you do in the moment? You create it live. As they're presenting, you're over at the dry erase board like I talked about, and you're bullet pointing out the key points. You're putting the jargon, the buzzwords, this acronym equals this thing. You're really kind of building out an overall summary of what they're talking about as they talk about it. You can use that not only to clarify something that doesn't make sense to you, because if it don't make sense to you, it don't make sense to someone else in the room. You can use it to clarify, but you're building a visual of what they're talking about. And then as a pro tip, take a picture of that visual and go back and create formal graphics that you give to the SME for next time. You can ask the presenters, hey, you're talking about this cool process flow. Could you come show me, come to the dry erase board and map this out? You ask the clarifying questions as the facilitator to prompt the SME to come to the dry erase board or flip chart and sketch something out in the moment. You just created some learning content. It's going to be a sketch. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be polished, but it's something, and it's something to help your learners learn. Encourage your SMEs to give practical examples off the top of their head. Encourage them to if they've got some piece of equipment that they can bring, some hands-on demonstration, at least they've got that. And you might have to create that in the moment. So create content in the moment. You can also do a live chat. Sometimes, especially virtual sessions, as the facilitator, you can be over in the chat feed just dropping stuff in while the SME is presenting. You're over there putting those key takeaways, putting those reminders, linking to internal resources, grabbing a YouTube video that makes sense for that training session. You're linking to internal documents or resource libraries, or you're just putting cool information out there. Again, creating that content in the moment. So there you go. That's point number 10 of how do you wing it without actually winging it. You can generate content in the moment if you just sort of use your training experience, take what the SMEs are presenting and quickly put something together. Again, it's not ideal, it's not recommended, it's not best practice, but sometimes we got to do it, and that's a way to at least make it better than it could be. How do you wing it without actually winging it? Again, it's a shame. We know as trainers, the more you prepare, the more you follow learning approaches as opposed to presenting approaches, the more you inject adult learning concepts into corporate training, the better it will be. The more you follow the 6 pillars of interesting and effective training that No Boring Training talks about, the 6 pillars of effective and interesting training. There's a free course over at noboringtraining.com that teaches you the 6 pillars of effective and interesting training. You and I know that as trainers. And if you think about that on the front end, you're going to get a much better result on the back end. If you prepare your content ahead of time, if you prepare your activities and role plays and simulations and breakouts and all that stuff ahead of time, we know that's better. Unfortunately, in corporate America, there are a number of challenges that we face. Leadership sometimes doesn't support training in general, let alone the time to prepare. Operational needs may present it as more and more organizations are lean and they thin out the number of people on staff. People may be doing 2, 3, 4 jobs. So to come spend hour after hour after hour with you, the trainer, to get ready, they may genuinely just not have that time. Or they just may not be wanting to follow along. It could be that they're nervous about being trainers. It could be that they're nervous about training. So they are resistant to preparing because they're trying to put it off as long as possible. So there's some reasons why sometimes we are forced as trainers to, in the moment, put together a rushed together session, go and deliver that session. These 10 tips are going to help you to make that session far more effective than it could have been. Not as effective as it could be, but more effective than it would have been without doing these tips. What do you think? I see that we've got some members of MBT Nation still out there. Looks like a couple folks on here. What do you think? Drop me a comment down below. Are these tips helpful? Are they effective? Which one is surprising you the most? Let me know. Be sure you give this live a thumbs up. Tag somebody in if you feel like this would be effective information for them. You can visit noboringtraining.com for resources, tools, free courses, free guides, free PDFs. There's some products and services as well that can take your training, transform your training to take it so that you're getting results, not yawns. Hope you found this effective, MBT Nation. I know it's Sunday on a Mother's Day in America, so we'll wrap up here. Thanks so much for joining me. It has been fantastic. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Thanks so much, and we'll be talking soon.